Planning Commission recently released a report titled Scenarios Shaping India's Future. This report suggested measures to depart from the conventional planning methods. We have with us Mr. Arun Maira to share some of the insights from this report. What was the motivation behind this report?
What was the purpose of this process? It's not so much the report as it's the process, and the process is not over. The process was about engaging Indians with the future of their own country and engaging them in a way that they helped us, each other, to understand the system of which we all are a part, and also then to get committed to doing what needs to be done and what they must support as citizens for producing the future that we want to have. So that is the process of systems thinking, scenario planning, for which then we ask the help of Anshu and C-STEP, because he and his colleagues are probably one of the best organizations that we came across, or the best we came across in India on systems thinking and modeling systems, which is an essential tool required for scenario planning.
For many of us who regularly follow the plan documents and read through the 5-year plans, which are historically filled with data, statistics, tables, and departmental reports, it was very refreshing as well as intriguing to see a report which has terms like flotilla, muddling around. So could you articulate a bit more on how you envisioned this report and how you thought about the whole process?
As I said, we must get our citizens, all Aam Aadmi even, not just the doctors and the experts, to engage with ourselves and our future. And everyone doesn't talk the same language. I mean, of course, not the same language in terms of linguistic languages, but even language in terms of the ideas that we use in our language and ideas that we understand. So there are certain concepts which are very economic concepts and certain concepts which are very financial and technical concepts, which our plans need to address, and they're quite full of them. And government policy discussions are also using those concepts and terms. But most citizens, and it's not a lack of education. I mean, very well educated social scientists can't understand the language of economists, perhaps. So we have to have a common language in which we can talk about our system and our future. So this common language would use words which are colloquial and commonly understood. So when you say that muddling along, for example, it expresses in 2 words a condition which people begin to smile and say, yeah, I know that's what the situation is. To describe muddling along, through 3 or 4 tables which shows that things aren't moving and things are contradicting, when you're losing the essence of it, you might as well use 2 words and say, okay, I've located what the condition of the system is. So systems thinking, when it is to be used then for communicating and understanding, does require then these metaphors and pictures to represent that system in metaphors and pictures, not merely in numbers and diagrams. Okay, so maybe this was the one addition which was provided to your work, and which is why it intrigued you, because it seemed unusual. But considering the purpose of what we are doing, we are not developing systems analysis for experts to design a security system or a transportation system. It's for people to engage with the system of which they are a part, which is Indians with India.
The planning process so far, the conventional planning process, this is quite a departure from what has been in the system. So how did you come upon this need for scenario analysis? What are the forces that you talk about in the report?
Well, actually it goes back, talking of you means first me and then the Planning Commission together. I go back into the 1990s actually, when we'd gone into our liberalization mode, in which many people were questioning the value of any centralized planning in a system which is supposed to be more open, market-based system. So the question was, what should the Planning Commission do? And I was not in India even at the time, but I'm not in the Planning Commission for sure. So I just asked people here in the Planning Commission who I knew that, what about refurbishing planning for the context in which we are now having to move the country. So that was one. The second was looking around at other countries and how are they doing engagement with their citizens to create a new direction for their future. So that's at the essence what planning should be, right? It's not a plan given to the people, it's a plan made by the people, of the people, and for the people, of course. So as we looked around there, we found that I knew that companies were doing it because I used to work with companies on using scenario thinking. Found the country of South Africa, which had in the middle of the 1990s used scenario planning for engaging people from diverse backgrounds and diverse ideologies, the leftists and the corporate rightists, together to think what would the future of South Africa be if they let things muddle along, let's say, at that time, or to fall into some falling apart. And there was a great fear when apartheid was abandoned, abolished, that the conflict between the blacks and the whites and the different ideologies could really make South Africa completely fall apart. So they had used scenario planning with metaphors actually, and this was their invention, to get language which people were using and apply that language, pictures really, to what was emerging as different alternative futures from the scenario process. So I was quite intrigued by that, and then I checked with friends who had worked in South Africa about what happened afterwards. Did it succeed in engaging the people? And they showed that yes, they even went into the villages and people enacted little dramas and plays of their own around the 3 or 4 metaphors or stories that we had. And you can imagine if you take our 3, I mean jumping now into the present, muddling along or falling apart, or the flotilla forms and advances, you can make many stories around these things, expressing the conditions in their own village under these 3 different conditions. So this is what induced us to say that we need to get the Planning Commission to become more modern, to fulfill its purpose in a more open, democratic society, and not be one which is giving them 1,000-page plans, but is giving them some ideas for a direction and then engaging them in the conversation about the direction, so you get support.
Now, based on the analysis, what would you reckon are the most important 2 or 3 key forces which we should certainly be aware of, and how does the current 12th five-year plan, does it factor them into account in a significant way?
See, we have the present condition we are saying like muddling along or maybe into falling apart. Why is it so? We say policy paralysis, but why is there policy paralysis? If you watch the debates on our TV right now, it is, they say the NDA or the BJP is an obstacle to the Congress and the UPA. And previously it was, well, the leftist view is an obstacle to either of them, both of them. And so there is disconnect, a disagreement between some very fundamental things which is holding up the agreements on what would be good policies for the country and then their implementation. And even when you announce a policy which with some consensus you believe would be a good one, like land reform or FDI and retail, it's not everybody hasn't come on board and haven't really understood it. So then even after you announce it, the implementation cannot be done. So this is the present main problem, that there is an inability to get points of view together. There is inability to do that because there is an increasing mistrust of each other. And from the armed citizen, there's a big mistrust of now the parliamentary system almost, unfortunately, but a big mistrust of government for sure, and an increasing mistrust of big business also, that they are part of this golmaal also. So this is a very bad situation to be, when all of us as citizens say, but where's the anchor for ourselves? What can we trust? What can we trust? So we located that. If we want to get better growth, GDP growth, if we want to get better balance of our budgets, which are the normal discourse about the plan is about the growth and the budget. If we want to get that, we would have to have better agreements, quicker agreements, and more implementation, because that will then result in not just in GDP growth, but better use of government money, and therefore better balance of the government budgets also. So the root causes are located through a systems analysis, and now, like we've said, in 2 or 3 minutes, you get to this root cause, and to address this root cause of mistrust, it points to that the caliber of the institutions needs to be tuned up, and then the collaboration between the institutions needs to be improved. Can this be done? Well, you can one say, oh, but that's very difficult. But as system analysis points out, that if you don't do it, the system is going to remain like this. So this is where then maybe courage and innovation is required to, how do we then tune up our institutions and improve the collaboration amongst them? And then you look around for examples elsewhere in the world where this was done previously when they were in similar situations, and they're in a much better position of coordination and trust. Or even in our own country, you'll find examples in different parts of the country or in different spheres of work where things are working together, even though the rest of the country doesn't seem to be working that well. So this puts you onto a learning agenda very quickly, that we need to learn about how to do this or these things. Now let's find out how, and let's start doing things which will solve these root cause problems.
One thing which I liked a lot in the report was that people typically associate innovation with innovations in science or technology, whereas you have emphasized very strongly that innovation is more than that. It is about business models and service delivery mechanisms, which actually take to the common man or to the Aam Aadmi at the grassroots level. Could you articulate a bit more on what, and also in the context of what you mentioned about local energy planning, local environmental planning, and a departure away from centralized large projects to a more efficient use of local resources, how can innovative business models play a role there?
One is to do with, like I said, about institutions. We must have innovations in institutions. Actually, institutions are not in nature. Institutions are devices created by humanity for making progress. The institution of democracy, the institution of universal franchise, the institution of parliaments wasn't there. It didn't come out of nature. It's an idea we have created because we feel that it will help us to get certain things that we value as human beings. Similarly, the institutions of corporate structures, limited liability companies, again, I mean, they weren't there. We've created these because they will help us to get certain types of results that we feel we need to have. So institutions are not given and cast in stone. Yes, so if we feel that something is not working, one thing which is in our hands to change are the institutions. So which is why we feel a lot of hope here, that if that's what needs to be changed, we can do something about it. If it was something like the amount of water there is on the earth or the amount of land there is on the earth, it's more difficult to do something about it, right? So this is good. Now to the point that you said about local models and business models, innovation in India would have to be about ensuring that all the people of this country get access to many things which are affordable to them, accessible to them, and of good quality too. So we have to in India also recognize that just putting more money into science and R&D by itself will not deliver the affordable, accessible, in large numbers, benefits that we want to give people. So we have put together in these scenarios 3 strategies, and they are self-reinforcing. One of the strategies is this emphasis on livelihoods rather than on handouts for economic inclusion. The other strategy is to do with local governance rather than planning at the top and telling people what is good for them. And the third is in the business models. So we must encourage these local initiatives, but provide collectively a commons, a framework, an infrastructure. And that infrastructure is not merely a physical infrastructure, it's the way we work together, which we can all benefit from and be more entrepreneurial and expect to gain, and for the community to gain out of it. So these 3 things are combined together in a paradigm of inclusive development, sustainable development, which is the goal for India, is the goal within the 12th plan as one step towards the bigger goal of India too.